Hi, I'm Frank A. Lancione. On behalf of the Civil Discourse Club of the Villages, I'd like to welcome you to this podcast on Community Development Districts, CDDs. If you live in the villages anywhere but inside the city limits of Lady Lake, you live in a Community Development District. We're going to take some time to talk about how CDDs get started and what they do. Every inch of landmass within the state of Florida is contained in one of 67 constitutionally defined counties. County is the basic unit of self-governance within the state of Florida. Within counties, the state also charters cities and towns. And within cities and towns and counties, the state charters special districts. A special district is basically an area that's been defined within which the residents agree to be taxed so that those funds can be used for a special purpose. That might be water management, it might be fire management, it might even be the urban renewal of the downtown of a city. But special districts have defined areas and special purposes. The type of special district that we're most interested in are community development districts. Now, what you see on the board are the kinds of things that community development districts do, and specifically, this is what the CDDs do within the villages. It's the kinds of things you would normally expect a municipal government to provide. Sewer and wastewater management, recreation facilities, security and EMS. So these are the types of activities that you can expect. They're basically infrastructure activities. Now I want you to think back to being in your car, entering Florida's Turnpike, heading towards Orlando about 3 years ago. If you look to the right, what did you see? Nothing. You saw Clyde the cow out there in the pasture, because there really was nothing there. But take that same ride today, 3 years later, and you see massive projects underway to establish the infrastructure for the villages of DeSoto, McClure, and if you could see all the way down to Fenny, you'd see almost 1,000 new residents within the village of Fenny. Now, how does that happen? Well, it starts when a developer buys the land. So one or more developers buy the land within a special district. They then approach the intervening state-defined self-governance structures, in this case, Sumter County and Wildwood City. They ask permission of those organizations to create a special district within their boundaries. If they get their approval, they then approach the state and seek state approval for the creation of a special district. Now, once a special district is created, you need somebody to be able to do something. It needs some staffing. Special districts, community development districts, are run by 5-person boards of supervisors. Now, who's going to elect the supervisors? There's nobody living in the district at this point other than Clyde the cow, and he doesn't get a vote. Well, the landowners, the people who bought the original land and went to the state to seek development, they're the ones who staff up the initial CDD. It's called a landowner election. Each of the landowners, and there may be multiple developers, gets 1 vote per acre, and they elect the first 5 supervisors to the board. Now, if you think about it from the developer standpoint, they've been working at this project for a long time by this point. They've already decided what they want to build in the way of infrastructure. They've probably already worked with the appropriate zoning and people from the various county and city agencies. So they have their infrastructure plan all ready to go, and they have an estimate of what it's going to cost. They then go to the new Board of Supervisors with a plan and with a cost estimate. The Board of Supervisors provides some due diligence and reviews the plan. At that point, they go into a negotiation with a developer and they agree on a price that they're going to pay for the creation of the infrastructure. At that point, they charter the developer to go build the infrastructure. Now, where does the board get the money? Well, the board is the CDD itself is a public entity. And so they're able to raise tax-exempt bonds and sell tax-exempt bonds to raise the money. Now that's worth a moment's notice. All developers have to pay for the infrastructure to create a new development, a new community. If they don't do the CDD, they're going to just seek another form of financing. Because the CDD is a public entity and can issue tax-exempt bonds, it gets a price break. Tax-exempt bonds don't have to pay as much interest in order to attract buyers. So immediately for residents, that's an advantage for the people who are ultimately going to buy into that development. All right, the bonds have been issued, the developer is frantically building the infrastructure. Pretty soon the houses start to be built within the community. And people buy the houses. Now, I live in the village of Antrim Dells. Like all other purchasers within the villages, when I bought my home, I bought the land, I bought the structure, and I also bought a bond. That bond was the share of the infrastructure costs to build my unit, which is the area that I live in, to build the infrastructure in my unit. My unit is 966. So at the time, I had a choice. I could have paid that bond off immediately upon the purchase of my home. I chose not to. So the 30 years of interest plus the initial cost of the bond came to about $43,000 for me and the other 182 people who purchased within Antrim Dells. Each year when I get my tax bill from the county assessor, there in the non-ad valorem tax area, there's a charge that says bond assessment. There's also a charge that says annual maintenance fee, and that too is a CDD cost. Now, after 6 years of operation as a CDD, and when there is also at least 250 residents, then there's a change in how people are elected to the board and who is elected to the board. In the beginning, there was no one living there, so you didn't have to be a resident to elect anyone because you couldn't be a resident. But now, after 6 years of operation and 250 residents, the amount of land that the original developers owned has decreased. The amount of land that's owned by residents has increased. And so at this point, as the original supervisors have their terms of office expire and come up for re-election, instead of being elected by landowners, they're elected by residents. So every resident within the CDD is able to vote for the supervisors, and it's not tied to the amount of land that they own. The other fact that happens is that the original supervisors couldn't have lived in the CDD because there was no place to live. But now, after we've gone and hit the 6 years, 250 threshold, you have to be a resident in order to run for the Board of Supervisors. So the ultimate goal of a CDD, once you've gotten past that startup, is a special district run by residents who are elected by the residents and making decisions about how that CDD will operate. Sort of a final point, what is it that CDDs do once they're in full operation? Well, there's three main areas that they care for. First, remember that annual maintenance fee? Each year the board has to determine what charges are necessary to cover the costs of maintaining this year's operations, as well as putting money aside to cover large and known future capital expenditures. I live in CDD 10. In CDD 10, we have an annual 2018 operating budget of $3.3 million. The capital reserves are $14 million. So there's a considerable amount of money to be managed by the board. Additionally, some of the CDDs within the villages this year sought to refinance their initial bonds to lower the interest rates for residents. So there's a considerable amount of financial oversight that the Board of Supervisors has to provide. A second thing is that there's a lot of contract administration and contract oversight. Each CDD could contract separately for the services that it needs. But in the villages, the CDDs, the 13 residential CDDs, choose to contract with the district government. The district government is like a service center. It reports to the village center CDD, which is a commercial CDD. It takes requirements from all of the residential CDDs, consolidates those into master contracts, and goes to the market. Great process because it allows what might be a single CD with just a small number of residents to get the benefit of buying across all 17 CDDs here in the villages. But that means that the board has to do a lot of oversight. They need to make sure that the district government is contracting for the right things, that they're selecting the right people, and that the district and its contractors are delivering what they promise. The third thing that a CDD does is policy. When you signed your home, when you bought your home, you signed a set of deed restrictions and covenants that said you wouldn't make changes to the exterior of your property without clearing that through an architectural review committee process. The CDD boards of supervisors are the ultimate authorities within that district on what the guidelines are for the architectural rules of that district. So they have a centralized district architectural review committee that looks at individual cases, but if a homeowner wants to appeal a decision, they appeal it to the CDD, and if the homeowner wants a change to the architectural guidelines for that district, they take that to the overall CDD Supervisory Board. So that's a quick look at what CDDs do, how they're formed, and how they transition from landowner to resident leadership. Benefits, well, the idea that the CDD is able to issue tax-exempt bonds, that's a savings in cost for anybody who buys into that CDD. The idea that the CDD enables the developer to add extras. If you take a look at the landscaping on Buena Vista or Morse, and then look at the landscaping on County Road 44, you can see that through the CDD process, we were able to initially build something that was a little richer, a little nicer than what would be the standard for the county. And then finally, the CDD provides a very orderly process for the transition from developer leadership to resident leadership. So wrapping up, a lot of benefits for us for CDDs. It gets you all the way from Clyde the Cow to an up and running community. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and on behalf of the Civil Discourse Club of the Villages, thank you for listening.